Sometimes the pain we carry runs deeper than we ever imagined. For 30-something drifter Wes McGraw, what started as a simple swollen foot would become a journey into the impossible. He limped into the only clinic in Dustwell, Wyoming, expecting the doctor to find an old rodeo injury. Instead, the doctor discovered tiny, century-old metal objects growing inside his flesh, including an 1883 pocket watch gear. Wes had never been near a mine, yet his blood contained traces of elements not seen for decades. More antique items began pushing through his skin. The town's oldest residents grew anxious and whispered about the sealed mine. Outside town closed since a deadly cave-in generations ago. Wes started having visions of men who died before he was born. How can a man carry the metal remnants of another era in his very bones? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning sun cast long shadows across the weathered buildings of Dustwell, Wyoming, a town that time seemed to have forgotten. Population 847, according to the faded sign at the town limits, though most folks suspected that number was generous. By 100 or so, Wes McGraw shifted uncomfortably on the examination table, his calloused hands gripping the edge as Dr. Sarah Chun studied the x-rays, clipped to the light board with the intensity of someone who'd never seen anything quite like this in her 15 years of practice. "Mr. McGraw," she said, her voice carrying the careful tone doctors use when they're trying not to alarm their patients, "I need you to help me understand something. These metal fragments, they're not recent injuries." Wes nodded slowly. At 34, he'd accumulated enough rodeo scars and ranch work injuries to fill a medical textbook. His weathered face bore the lines of a man who'd spent most of his adult life outdoors, moving from town to town, job to job, never staying anywhere long enough to call it home. "I figured as much, Doc. Been feeling something strange in my foot for weeks now. Thought maybe I stepped on something and forgot about it." Dr. Chun had arrived in Dustwell 3 years ago, fresh from her residency in Denver, with idealistic notions about serving rural communities. The town had been without a doctor for 2 years, and the nearest hospital was 90 miles away over mountain roads that became treacherous in winter. She'd planned to stay 2 years, pay down her student loans with the government program, and then return to city medicine. Instead, she'd found herself becoming part of the fabric of this small community, caring for 3 generations of the same families, delivering babies and holding hands with the dying. "Wes," she said, using his first name as she did with all her patients, "this isn't something you stepped on. These objects, they appear to be embedded in your tissue, integrated into your muscle and bone structure. The 1883 pocket watch gear we removed yesterday? The metal composition is unlike anything I've seen. It's corroded, tarnished, aged in a way that suggests it's been there for decades." She pulled another x-ray from the stack. "And there are more. Look at this." Her finger traced along the ghostly outline of his ankle. These appear to be Spurs' old-fashioned riding spurs. Silver, by the looks of them. They're positioned along your Achilles tendon. Wes felt a chill run through him that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. "That's impossible, Doc. I've never owned silver spurs. Can't afford them on a ranch hand's wages." "I know it sounds impossible, but they're there, and they're causing the swelling and inflammation in your foot. More concerning is that they seem to be moving, shifting positions slightly over time." The clinic was modest 4 examination rooms, a small waiting area with mismatched chairs and outdated magazines, and Dr. Chen's office that doubled as a records room. Through the window, Wes could see Main Street stretching 3 blocks before fading into the prairie grassland that rolled toward the mountains. A few pickup trucks were angled parked in front of Murphy's General Store, and old-timers sat on benches outside the post office, probably discussing the weather or cattle prices. "Dr. Chun," Wes said, his voice quiet but steady. "I need you to know something. Last night, after you removed that watch gear, I had the strangest dream. Except it didn't feel like a dream." She pulled up a chair, recognizing the serious tone in his voice. "Tell me about it." "I was in a mine, a deep dark mine with wooden support beams and oil lanterns hanging from the walls. I could smell the earth, feel the dampness in the air. But here's the thing, I was someone else. I had different hands, smaller hands, and I was wearing clothes that weren't mine. Old-fashioned work clothes, heavy boots." He paused, running his fingers through his brown hair. "There were other men with me, maybe 20 or so. They were speaking Spanish, some in English with accents I couldn't place. And they were scared. Doc, terrified of something." Dr. Chen made notes in his file, though she wasn't sure what medical category this fell under. "Go on." "The foreman, I knew he was the foreman. No, nobody told me he was a man named Rodriguez. Miguel Rodriguez. He kept looking at his pocket watch, and I could see it clearly. It was the same watch that gear came from. He was shouting orders, telling everyone to get out, that the supports were failing. And then Wes stopped, his face pale. Then what? Everything came down. The ceiling, the walls, everything. I felt the weight of it, the crushing darkness. But mostly, I felt their fear. Not just Rodriguez's fear, but all of them. 23 men, Doc. They all died down there." Dr. Chun set down her pen. In medical school, they'd covered psychological responses to trauma, phantom pain, even mass hysteria. But this felt different. The specificity of details, the emotional weight in Wes's voice, it didn't fit the patterns she'd studied. "Wes, have you ever been in a mine? Ever worked underground?" "Never. Spent my whole life above ground ranches, rodeos, construction work. Wide open spaces. I don't even like basements much." A soft knock on the door interrupted them. "Come in," Dr. Chen called. Martha Henley poked her head through the doorway. At 78, she was the unofficial town historian and had run the small library for 43 years. Her silver hair was pulled back in the same neat bun she'd worn for decades, and her blue eyes held the sharp intelligence of someone who'd spent a lifetime cataloging other people's stories. "Sorry to interrupt, Dr. Chun, but I heard about Mr. McGraw's situation, and I think there might be something he should know." Dr. Chun gestured for her to enter. In a town this small, privacy was a luxury few could afford, and Martha Henley was as trustworthy as anyone. "Martha, what is it?" Wes asked. The elderly librarian pulled a manila folder from under her arm. "I went through our historical records last night after I heard about that pocket watch gear. Wes, there was a mine disaster here in 1883. The Ashford Mine, about 3 miles northwest of town. 23 men died in a cave-in." Wes felt the blood drain from his face. 23? 23, Martha confirmed. One of them was the mine foreman, Miguel Rodriguez. He was trying to evacuate the workers when the supports gave way. They found his pocket watch in the rubble, stopped at 3:47 in the afternoon. Dr. Chun looked. Between them. "Martha, that's an interesting coincidence, but it's not a coincidence, dear." Martha opened the folder and pulled out a yellowed newspaper clipping. "This is from the Dustwell Gazette, October 15th, 1883. Look at this photograph." She handed the brittle paper to Wes. The headline read, "Mine Disaster Claims 23 Lives." And below, it was a group photograph of the mining crew taken just weeks before the accident. The faces were grainy, but Wes found himself staring at one man. In particular, a tall, lean figure standing at the back of the group. "That's Samuel Morrison," Martha said, pointing to the same face. "He was one of the younger miners, about your age. Newly married to my great-great-grandmother's sister, Elizabeth." Wes studied the photograph more closely. The resemblance was unmistakable. The same jawline, the same set to the shoulders, even the same way of standing with one hip slightly cocked. "Martha," Dr. Chen said slowly, "are you suggesting some kind of family connection?" "I'm not suggesting anything, Dr. Chen. I'm just sharing what I know. But I will say this. In all my years in this town, I've heard the old stories about how sometimes, when there's been a great injustice, the past has a way of calling out for resolution." Wes set the photograph on the examination table, his hands trembling slightly. What kind of injustice? Martha's expression grew somber. The mine owner, Cornelius Ashford, cut every corner he could to maximize profits. The men knew the mine was dangerous. They'd complained about faulty supports, gas pockets, unsafe conditions. But Ashford threatened to fire anyone who wouldn't work. These were poor men, immigrants mostly, with families to feed. They didn't have choices. What happened to Ashford? Dr. Chen asked. Made a fortune and moved to California. The mine was sealed after the accident, declared too dangerous to recover the bodies. Those 23 men are still down there. Dr. Chen, still waiting for justice. A heavy silence settled over the examination room. Outside, the normal sounds of small-town life continued, a dog barking, children playing, the distant hum of traffic on the county road. But inside, something had shifted. "Martha," Wes said finally, "do you believe these things I'm experiencing are connected to those miners?" The old librarian looked at him with eyes that had seen 8 decades of life, death, joy, and sorrow. "Wes, I've lived in this town my entire life. I've heard stories from my grandmother and her grandmother before her. I've seen things that can't be explained by modern thinking. What I believe is that some wrongs are so deep, so profound, that they echo through time until someone with the strength and heart to listen finally hears them." Dr. Chen felt a chill despite the warm afternoon air. "This is all very interesting from a historical perspective, but medically speaking, we need to focus on Wes's health. These metal objects are real. They're causing inflammation and pain, and they need to be addressed." "Of course, dear," Martha said gently. "I'm not suggesting we ignore the medical aspects, but I am suggesting that maybe, just maybe, the medical and the mysterious are more connected than we want to admit." As if summoned by their conversation, Grace Morrison appeared in the doorway. She was a woman in her mid-50s with graying brown hair and kind eyes that crinkled at the corners from years of smiling despite hardship. She'd been running the boarding house on Elm Street since her husband died in a car accident 5 years ago, providing clean rooms and home-cooked meals to the occasional traveler who found their way to Dustwell. "I'm sorry to interrupt, Grace. Sod, but I heard voices and wanted to check on our guest." She'd been the one to offer Wes a room when he'd first arrived in town, sensing something lost and weary in his demeanor that reminded her of her own husband in his troubled moments. "Grace, come in," Dr. Chen said. "We were just discussing some historical connections to Wes's condition." Grace's eyes fell on the old photograph in Wes's hands, and her expression changed. "Oh my," she whispered, moving closer. "Samuel Morrison. He was my great-great-grandfather's brother." "Your family has deep roots here," Martha observed. 5 generations, Grace confirmed. "My family's been in Dustwell since before it was officially a town. Samuel Morrison married Elizabeth Hayes. That was my great-great-grandmother's maiden name, just 3 months before the mine disaster. She was pregnant with their first child when he died." Wes felt a strange pull, as if invisible threads were connecting him to these women, to this place, to events that happened long before he was born. "Grace, do you know anything else about Samuel?" "I know he was a good man who died trying to help others. Elizabeth used to tell stories about how he'd stay late after his shifts to help the newer miners learn the safety procedures. He was always looking out for the younger, more inexperienced workers." She paused, studying Wes's face. "The resemblance really is remarkable." Dr. Chun cleared her throat. I hate to interrupt this genealogy discussion, but I'm concerned about Wes's immediate health. Those spurs in his ankle are causing increasing inflammation, and I'm worried about infection. Can you remove them? Wes asked. One can try, but the procedure would be complex. They appear to be integrated into your tissue in ways that shouldn't be medically possible. I'd need to consult with surgical specialists, maybe arrange for you to be seen in Denver or Salt Lake City. No, Wes said quickly. I mean, I appreciate the offer, Doc, but I don't have insurance for that kind of surgery. And honestly, something tells me that leaving Dustwell right now wouldn't be the right thing to do. Martha nodded approvingly. Sometimes we need to see things through, even when we don't fully understand them. Grace placed a gentle hand on Wes's shoulder. You'll stay at the boarding house as long as you need to. No charge. I have a feeling you're here for a reason, and I want to help however I can. Dr. Chun sighed, recognizing the stubborn determination that seemed to run through every long-time resident of this town. At least let me monitor your condition closely. Daily check-ins, blood work, x-rays to track any changes. And if your symptoms worsen, fever, severe pain, any sign of systemic infection, we get you to a hospital immediately. Agreed, Wes said. As the three women prepared to leave, Martha turned back to Wes. There's something else you should know. The Ashford mine isn't just sealed, it's been deliberately forgotten. The current town council discourages any talk about it, says it's bad for tourism and development. But the entrance is still there, about 3 miles north on the old mining road. Martha, Grace said, a warning note in her voice. I'm just sharing information, Grace. Wes deserves to know the full story. After they left, Wes sat alone in the examination room, staring at the old photograph. The face of Samuel Morrison looked back at him with eyes that seemed familiar, as if he were looking into a mirror that reflected not his own features but his own spirit. Dr. Chun returned with a small plastic container. I want you to take these anti-inflammatory medications and use this ice pack on your ankle 20 minutes at a time, 3 times a day. And Wes, if you have any more of those dreams, I want you to write down everything you remember. Every detail. You think they're connected to my condition? I think, she said carefully, that in medicine, we sometimes encounter things that challenge our understanding of what's possible. I'm not ready to dismiss anything at this point. That evening, as Wes settled into the comfortable bedroom Grace had prepared for him at the boarding house, he found himself thinking about the events of the day. The room was simple but clean, with handmade quilts, a wooden rocking chair, and a window that looked out toward the mountains where the Ashford mine waited in the darkness. He picked up a pen and notebook from the bedside table and began to write, documenting every detail of his vision from the night before. As he wrote, he felt the strange sensation in his ankle intensify, as if the silver spurs were responding to his recollection of Samuel Morrison's final moments. Outside, the wind picked up, carrying with it the scent of sage, and something else, something that smelled like deep earth and old fears. Wes set down the pen and closed his eyes, feeling a profound sense that his journey was just beginning. 3 days later, Wes returned to Dr. Chun's clinic for his follow-up appointment, walking with a pronounced limp that had worsened despite the anti-inflammatory medication. The morning air carried the crisp promise of autumn and the mountains that ringed Dustwell were touched with early snow that gleamed like silver in the sunlight. The spurs have shifted, Dr. Chen announced after studying the new x-rays. Her voice carried a note of bewilderment that she tried to keep professional. They've moved almost 2 inches along your tendon, and there's something else. She clipped a new image to the light board, and Wes felt his breath catch in his throat. Near his heart, clearly visible in the ghostly outline of his ribs, was the unmistakable shape of a compass. That wasn't there before, he said quietly. No, it wasn't. This appeared sometime in the last 72 hours. Dr. Chun pointed to the artifact with her pen. It's positioned near your left ventricle, but somehow it's not interfering with your cardiac function. Your EKG is normal, blood pressure stable. Medically, this should be impossible. Wes placed his hand over his heart, feeling a strange warmth radiating from within. Can I see it up close? Dr. Chun pulled out a magnifying glass and positioned it over the X-ray. The compass was clearly defined, an old-fashioned brass instrument with intricate engravings around the edges, even in the grainy black and white. Of the X-ray, they could see that the needle was pointing in a specific direction. Northwest, Wes murmured. It's pointing northwest. How can you tell the direction from an X-ray? I just know. He looked up at her with eyes that seemed older than they had 3 days ago. Dr. Chan, I need to ask you something. Do you have a compass here in the clinic? She rummaged through her desk drawer and pulled out a small hiking compass she kept. For emergencies. Here. Wes took the compass and watched as the needle settled. It pointed due north, as expected. But as he held it, something extraordinary happened. The needle began to swing, slowly and deliberately, until it pointed northwest in exactly the same direction as the compass in his chest. That's not possible, Dr. Chun whispered. Neither is having a century-old brass compass growing inside my heart, Wes replied with a weary smile. But here we are. A knock on the examination room door interrupted them. Dr. Chun? Ken Grace's voice. I'm sorry to bother you, but there's been an incident at the boarding house. Come in, Grace. What kind of incident? Grace entered, looking shaken. It's about Wes's room. This morning, after he left for his appointment, I went in to change the bedding. The walls. There were marks on the walls that weren't there yesterday. What kind of marks? Wes asked. Like someone had carved words into the plaster with their fingernails. Deep scratches forming letters. They spelled out find use and remember. But Wes, your fingernails are short and clean. There's no way you could have done it, and you were. Asleep all night. I would have heard. Dr. Chun felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. Grace, did you take photographs? I did. She pulled out her phone and showed them the images. The scratches were deep and precise, carved with desperate intensity into the wall beside the bed. The letters were uneven but readable, as if written by someone unused to forming words. Wes studied the photographs, and suddenly his vision blurred. The examination room faded away, and he found himself standing in darkness, surrounded by the sound of dripping water and the distant echo of metal striking stone. He was in the mine again, but this time he was someone different. His hands were smaller, more weathered, and he held a brass compass in his palm. Around him, other miners worked by lamplight, their faces grim with the knowledge that they were digging their own graves. Jacob, called a voice with a Spanish accent. Jacob, the compass, what does it say? He looked down at the instrument in his hand and realized he was Jacob Thorne, the mine surveyor. His job was to map the tunnels, to ensure they were following the richest veins of ore while avoiding the dangerous gas pockets and unstable rock formations. We need to go back, he heard himself saying. The compass is acting strange. It keeps pointing toward the old section, the one Ashford ordered us to avoid. Why would it do that? Asked Miguel Rodriguez, the foreman. I don't know, but look. Jacob held up the compass, and the needle swung wildly before settling on a direction that made no geological sense. It's pointing towards something that isn't ore. Something else. The vision intensified, and Jacob could feel the weight of responsibility crushing down on him like the tons of rock above their heads. He knew something terrible was coming. The supports were failing, the gas levels were rising, and Ashford's orders to dig deeper into the unstable section were going to kill them all. We have to warn them, Jacob whispered. We have to get everyone out. But even as he spoke, the ground beneath their feet began to tremble. Wes, Dr. Chun's voice cut. through the vision like a lifeline. "Wes, come back." He found himself on the floor of the examination room, Grace kneeling beside him with worry etched across her face. Dr. Chun was checking his pulse, her medical training taking over even as her scientific worldview crumbled around her. "I was Jacob Thorne," Wes said, his voice hoarse. "The mine surveyor." He knew the cave-in was coming, but he couldn't stop it. "Jacob Thorne?" Grace repeated. "But how do you know that name?" "Because I was him." I felt his fear, his guilt about not being able to save everyone. Wes struggled to sit up. The compass, his compass, it wasn't pointing toward ore. It was pointing towards something else, something that Ashford didn't want them to find. Dr. Chun helped him back onto the examination table. "Wes, your vital signs spiked dramatically during that episode. Heart rate, blood pressure, brain activity. It was as if you were experiencing genuine physical trauma. Because I was." Jacob Thorne died in that cave-in, crushed under tons of rock, knowing he'd failed to save his friends. Wes placed his hand over his heart, feeling the warmth of the brass compass pulsing beneath his skin. "And now his compass is inside me, still trying to point the way to whatever truth he was trying to uncover." Grace pulled up a chair, her expression thoughtful. "Wes, there's something I didn't mention earlier about my family history in this town." "What is it?" "My great-great-grandmother, Elizabeth Samuel Morrison's wife, she kept a diary. It's been passed down through the generations. In it, she wrote about the weeks leading up to the mine disaster. The miners were scared, talking about strange readings on their instruments, about sections of the mine that seemed to call to them." "What kind of strange readings?" "Compasses that pointed in impossible directions. Metal detectors that registered massive deposits where there should have been only rock. And the men reported shared dreams where they experienced the mine through each other's eyes." Dr. Chun shook her head in disbelief. "This is all fascinating from an anthropological perspective, but we need to focus on Wes's immediate health. These episodes are becoming more frequent and more intense." "Dr. Chun," Wes said quietly, "what if the medical and the metaphysical aren't separate things? What if these artifacts are appearing in my body because I'm meant to complete something that Jacob Thorne and the others couldn't finish?" "Complete what?" "Find the truth. Expose what really happened in that mine." Before Dr. Chun could respond, Martha Henley burst through the clinic door with the urgency of someone who just made a disturbing discovery. "I've been researching all night," she announced, clutching a stack of old documents. "Wes, that compass vision you just had Jacob Thorne was real. He was the mine surveyor, and according to these old reports, he tried to file a safety complaint with the territorial authorities the week before the disaster. What happened to the complaint? It was suppressed. Cornelius Ashford had connections in the territorial government. But more importantly, Jacob's personal effects were never recovered from the mine. His compass, his surveying tools, his maps, everything disappeared in the cave-in." Wes felt the compass in his chest pulse with what felt like recognition. "Until now." "There's more," Martha continued. "I found correspondence between Ashford and his investors. They knew about the dangerous conditions, knew that pushing deeper into that section of the mine would likely cause a collapse. They calculated that the potential ore deposits were worth the risk to human life." Grace stood up abruptly, her face flushed with anger. "They murdered those men. Legally, it was ruled an industrial accident. But morally, ethically, yes, Grace, it was murder." Dr. Chun found herself caught between her medical training and the growing evidence that something beyond normal experience was happening. Even if that's true, even if there was a cover-up, what does it have to do with Wes's condition now? "Because," Wes said, standing despite the pain in his ankle, "some injustices are so profound that they echo through time until someone finally hears them. The compass isn't just pointing northwest, it's pointing toward the mine. Jacob Thorne is trying. to lead me to whatever evidence he couldn't present before he died. Martha nodded grimly. The mine entrance was sealed with concrete after the disaster, but the old mining road is still there. It's about 3 miles from here, up in the foothills. Absolutely not, Dr. Chun said firmly. Wes, your condition is deteriorating. These episodes are putting enormous stress on your cardiovascular system. I won't permit you to go wandering around abandoned mining sites in your current state. Doc, I appreciate your concern, but I don't think I have a choice. These artifacts, these visions, they're not going to stop. If anything, they're getting stronger. He looked at the compass in her hand, watching as its needle continued to point toward the northwest. Something up there is calling to me. I think the only way to find peace is to answer. Grace placed a protective hand on his arm. Then, you won't go alone. This town has ignored what happened to those miners for too long. If there's finally a chance to honor their memory and expose the truth, then we'll help you do it. Dr. Chun realized she was fighting a battle she couldn't win. The rational, scientific part of her mind rejected everything she was witnessing, but the evidence was becoming impossible to ignore. Whatever was happening to Wes McGraw was beyond her medical expertise to explain or treat. At least let me come. With you, she said finally. If you're determined to do this, you'll need medical supervision. And I want to document everything for the medical journals, if nothing else. As the 4 of them stood in the small examination room, surrounded by X-rays of impossible artifacts and the weight of century-old injustice, they felt the pull of destiny drawing them toward the sealed mine in the mountains. The compass in. Wes's chest pulsed with increasing urgency, as if time were running short to complete Jacob Thorne's unfinished mission. Outside, the wind picked up, carrying with it the scent of distant snow and something deeper. The smell of earth that had been disturbed long ago and was finally ready to give up its secrets. That night, sleep eluded Wes McGraw like a wild horse that refused to be broken. He lay in the comfortable bed at Grace's boarding house, staring at the ceiling while the compass in his chest pulsed with a rhythm that seemed to match his heartbeat. Every time he closed his eyes, he felt himself slipping into the consciousness of another man, sometimes Jacob Thorne, sometimes Samuel Morrison, sometimes miners whose names he didn't yet know, but whose fears he shared completely. Around midnight, the room grew cold despite the warm September air outside. Wes pulled the quilt up to his chin and tried to focus on his breathing, but the darkness behind his eyelids filled with images of lamplit tunnels and desperate faces. This time, he found himself in the body of a young man, barely more than a boy, whose calloused hands trembled as he lit a miner's lamp. The flame flickered to life, casting dancing shadows on the rough-hewn walls of a tunnel that seemed to stretch endlessly into the black heart of the mountain. "Tommy," called a voice from deeper in the mine. "Tommy Santos, bring that lamp over. Here." The name felt familiar on his lips as he responded. "Coming, Mr. Rodriguez." Tommy Santos. 19 years old, Wes realized, feeling the young man's memories like his own. He'd come north from New Mexico with his father and 2 older brothers, looking for steady work in the mines. His English was still uncertain, but his dedication to providing for his family back home was absolute dot as Tommy made his way through the tunnel. The lamp glass caught on a protruding beam and cracked. The light didn't go out, but it began to flicker strangely, casting an ethereal glow that seemed to pulse with its own life. "Careful with that lamp, boy," Miguel Rodriguez said as Tommy approached. "We can't afford to lose light down here." "Yes, sir. The glass is cracked, but it still burns." Miguel examined the damaged lamp, frowning. "Strange. I've never seen a flame burn like that through cracked glass. It's almost like..." He stopped, his experienced miner's instincts picking up something wrong in the air around them. "Like what, sir?" "Like it's trying to show us something." The vision intensified. And Wes could feel Tommy's confusion and growing fear as the lamp's ethereal light revealed things that shouldn't have been there. Tool marks on the walls that were too precise, too recent, as if someone had been mining. In sections that were supposed to be abandoned, the scene shifted, and suddenly Wes was back in his own body, gasping for air as the bedroom came into focus around him. But the ethereal light remained a soft, otherworldly glow emanating from his bedside table. He sat up slowly, his heart racing, and saw that a piece of cracked lamp glass had emerged from the skin on his forearm during the vision. The glass was old, yellowed with age, and despite being broken, it glowed with the same ethereal light he'd seen in Tommy Santis's final moments. "Jesus," he whispered, picking up the fragment carefully. It was warm to the touch and pulsed with light that seemed to come from within the glass itself. A soft knock on his door interrupted his amazement. "Wes?" Grace's voice was concerned but gentle. "I saw a light under your door. Are you all right?" "Grace, you need to see this." She entered the room wearing a quilted robe, her graying hair loose around her shoulders. When she saw the glowing glass fragment in Wes's hands, she drew in a sharp breath. "Oh my lord, what is that?" It belonged to a young miner named Tommy Santis. He was 19 when he died in the cave-in. Wes held the glass up to the lamplight, watching the way it seemed to contain its own source of illumination. "Grace, I lived through his final shift in the mine. He was trying to help the other miners, trying to bring light to the darkest corners so they could find their way out." Grace sat on the edge of the bed, her expression filled with wonder and sorrow. Tommy Santis. I've heard that name before. My great-great-grandmother Elizabeth mentioned him in her diary. He was one of the youngest miners, barely older than a boy. He was scared, but he kept working, kept trying to help. Even when his lamp glass cracked, even when he knew something terrible was about to happen. Wes felt tears gathering in his eyes. They were all so young, Grace, so full of hope and dreams for their families. What did you see? In the mine, I mean. Evidence that someone had been working in sections that were supposed to be closed off. Tool marks that were too recent, too precise. Tommy's cracked lamp was showing them things that Ashford didn't want them to see. Grace reached out and gently touched the glowing glass. It pulsed brighter at her contact, and for a moment, her eyes grew distant. "I can feel him," she whispered. "Tommy, he's trying to tell us something." The next morning, Wes made his way to the small diner on Main Street, where he'd arranged to meet Jake Bradley, the mayor's son who'd been helping Martha with the historical research. Jake was a man in his early 30s, tall and lean with the kind of patient intelligence that came from years of teaching high school history before returning to help run his family's hardware store. "You look like hell," Jake said by way of greeting as Wes slid into the booth across from him. "Thanks for the honesty." Wes pulled the cracked lamp glass from his jacket pocket, watching Jake's eyes widen as the ethereal light danced across the diner's formica table. "This appeared last night. It belonged to Tommy Santis." Jake leaned forward, studying the artifact with the careful attention of someone trained to analyze historical evidence. "The luminescence, that's not normal, is it?" "Nothing about this is normal, Jake, but I'm starting to think that's the point. These miners died trying to expose something, and now their artifacts are surfacing through me to finish what they started." "I've been researching the mine disaster all night," Jake said, pulling out a notebook filled with his careful handwriting. The official report was filed by a territorial inspector named Harrison Caldwell. But here's what's interesting. Caldwell visited 3 other mines that same month, and his reports were detailed, thorough, filled with specific technical observations. And the Ashford mine report? 3 pages. Vague, generic, almost like it was written by someone who'd never actually been underground. Jake flipped through his notes. "I also found shipping records from the period. In the weeks before the disaster, Ashford was moving massive quantities of extracted material, much more than a mine that size should have been able to produce." "What kind of material?" That's where it gets interesting. The manifests list precious metals and rare minerals, but they're deliberately non-specific. No assay reports, no detailed compositions. It's like they were extracting something they didn't want officially documented. Wes felt the compass in his chest pulse with recognition. Tommy's lamp was showing them evidence of recent mining activity in supposedly closed sections. What if Ashford was using those miners as cover for a separate, undocumented extraction operation? That would explain why he was so determined to keep them working despite the dangerous conditions, Jake said. If they stopped mining, his other operation would have been exposed. The diner's bell chimed as Dr. Chun entered, looking tired but determined. She'd clearly been up most of the night as well, processing the medical impossibility of Wes's condition. I've been thinking about your artifacts, she said, sliding into the booth beside Jake. From a purely medical standpoint, the integration of these objects into your tissue is unprecedented. But there's a pattern to their emergence. They always appear during your visions, and they always seem to be connected to specific miners. 3 so far, Wes confirmed. The pocket watch gear from Miguel Rodriguez, the silver spurs from Samuel Morrison, and now the lamp glass from Tommy Santos. Each artifact serves a function, Dr. Chun observed. The watch gear marks time, the moment of the disaster. The spurs represent movement, connection to the land. The lamp glass provides illumination, reveals hidden truths. Jake looked up from his notebook. How many miners died in the cave-in? 23. Wes answered without hesitation. Then you might be carrying 23 different artifacts, each one representing a different piece of the story they're trying to tell. The weight of that possibility settled over them like a heavy blanket. 23 men, 23 stories of injustice and unfinished business, all focused through one drifter who'd stumbled into their path, seeking nothing more than treatment for a swollen foot. There's something else, Dr. Chen said quietly. I ran additional blood tests yesterday. The mineral traces in your system are increasing not just the metals from the artifacts, but other elements. Rare earth minerals that haven't been commercially mined in this region for over a century. What does that mean? It means your body is becoming a repository for geological evidence from the mine itself. You're not just carrying the miner's artifacts. You're carrying samples of whatever they died trying to protect. As they sat in the small-town diner, surrounded by the comfortable sounds of coffee cups and quiet conversation, they felt the weight of history pressing down on them. Somewhere in the mountains above Dustwell, the sealed Ashford mine waited with its secrets, and Wes McGraw was becoming the key to unlocking truths that had been buried for more than a century. The cracked lamp glass pulsed with ethereal light on the table between them, and in its glow, they could almost see the faces of 23 men who refused to be forgotten. The collapse came without warning during breakfast at Grace's boarding house. One moment Wes was spreading homemade jam on a piece of toast, listening to Grace talk about her plans to expand the vegetable garden behind the house, and the next moment he was on the floor, his body convulsing as if something massive were trying to break free from inside his chest. Wes. Grace dropped her coffee cup and rushed to his side, her nurturing instincts overriding her fear. Jake, call Dr. Chun now. But before Jake could reach for his phone, they could see what was happening. Through Wes's shirt, the outline of something large and angular was pushing against his skin from the inside, moving with deliberate purpose. Along his shoulder blade. It's coming through, Wes gasped, his face pale with pain and exertion. I can feel it, a pickaxe head. It's Miguel's pickaxe. The artifact emerged slowly, painfully, like a birth in reverse. The bent and corroded head of an old mining pickaxe broke through the skin between his shoulder blades, followed by several inches of the wooden handle that had somehow been preserved, despite being buried in human tissue for what seemed like decades. Grace grabbed a clean kitchen towel and pressed it against the wound, her hands steady despite the impossibility of what she was witnessing. Jake, get Dr. Chun here now. Don't explain over the phone. Just tell her it's an emergency. As Jake made the call, Wes struggled to sit up, his breath coming in short gasps. This one's different, he said. Heavier, more complete. He could feel Miguel Rodriguez's memories flooding through him, not just the final moments of the cave-in, but earlier memories of the mine foreman's growing desperation as he realized what Cornelius Ashford was really doing to his workers. Miguel had been a good man, a careful supervisor who put his miners' safety above production quotas. He'd worked in mines across the Western Territories and had never seen conditions as dangerous as those in the Ashford operation. But he had a wife and 3 young children in Denver, and the pay was better than anything else available. He knew. Wes whispered, his voice carrying the weight of Miguel's anguish. Rodriguez knew the mine was a death trap, but he couldn't abandon his crew. He kept trying to find ways to make it safer, to protect the younger miners. What did he know specifically? Grace asked, helping him into a chair. Ashford was running a double operation. The official mine was just a front dangerous, but not immediately lethal. There was another section, deeper in the mountain, where they were extracting something else entirely, something valuable enough to risk 23 lives. Dr. Chun arrived within minutes, her medical bag in hand and her expression grim with professional determination. She took one look at the pickaxe head, protruding from Wes's shoulder, and immediately began examining the wound. The tissue has already begun healing around the artifact, she observed, her voice filled with medical wonder despite the circumstances. There's no significant bleeding, no signs of infection. It's as if your body was designed to accommodate these objects. How is that possible? Jake asked. It's not possible, Dr. Chun replied simply, but it's happening anyway. She cleaned and bandaged the area around the pickaxe, working with the careful precision of someone who'd learned to adapt her medical training to unprecedented situations. Wes, I need you to tell me about any pain, any changes in your range of motion or breathing. Actually, I feel stronger, he admitted, testing his arm movements. Like carrying Miguel's tool is giving me access to his knowledge and experience. If to prove his point, Wes found himself moving with the confident economy of motion that comes from years of underground work. He could sense structural weaknesses in the boarding house's old wooden framework, could almost smell the mineral content in the water from Grace's well. There's something else, he said, his voice carrying a new authority. The pickaxe, it's not just a tool. It's pointing towards something, like the compass. He stood and held his arm at an angle that allowed the pickaxe head to align naturally. Just as with the compass, it pointed steadily northwest, toward the sealed mine in the mountains. They're all pointing the same direction, Grace realized. The compass, the spurs, the lamp glass, and now the pickaxe. They're trying to lead you somewhere specific. Dr. Chun was making detailed notes, trying to document the impossible for whatever medical authority might eventually need to review this case. Wes, I need to ask you something difficult. These episodes are intensifying, and the physical trauma of the artifact emergencies is putting enormous stress on your system. If this continues, you think it could kill me. I think, she said, carefully, that your body is undergoing changes that are beyond my ability to predict or treat. Each emergence is more complex than the last. Jake had been quietly working on his laptop during the medical examination, cross-referencing historical records with the new information Wes had provided about the mine's dual operations. I found something, he announced. Wes, you said Ashford was extracting something valuable from a deeper section of the mine. That's right. Something he didn't want documented in the official reports. Look at this. Jake turned his laptop screen toward them, displaying a shipping manifest dated 2 weeks before the mine disaster. Ashford shipped 12 tons of specialized geological samples to a private laboratory in San Francisco. The manifest lists the client as Morrison Geological Survey. Grace looked up sharply. Morrison? That was my family name, my great-great-grandmother's maiden name. It gets more interesting, Jake continued. The Morrison Geological Survey was owned by Samuel Morrison, not your ancestor, but a distant relative who was working as a mining engineer in California. He specialized in rare earth mineral extraction. So Samuel Morrison the miner and Samuel Morrison the engineer, they were related? Cousins, according to these records. And here's where it gets complicated. The California Samuel Morrison filed a lawsuit against Cornelius Ashford 3 months after the mine disaster, claiming that Ashford had stolen proprietary extraction techniques and was illegally mining Morrison family land. Wes felt the pickaxe head pulse against his shoulder blade, and suddenly he was experiencing another memory, not from the mine this time, but from an elegant office in San Francisco, where 2 men in expensive suits were engaged in a heated argument. "You're killing good men to steal my family's legacy," the younger man was saying. Samuel Morrison, the engineer, was tall and lean with the same basic features as his cousin in Wyoming. "That technique belongs to the Morrison family. We developed it. We refined it, and you have no right." "I have every right," Cornelius Ashford interrupted, his voice cold with arrogance. "I bought mining rights to that land fair and square. What I do with it is my business. You bought surface rights, not extraction rights. And you certainly didn't buy the right to use our proprietary processes without compensation." The vision faded, and Wes found himself back in Grace's kitchen, surrounded by concerned faces. "The extraction technique," he said slowly. "It wasn't just about the minerals. Ashford stole a specialized process from the Morrison family, something that made the extraction more profitable, but also more dangerous." "What kind of process?" Dr. Chan asked. "I'm not sure exactly, but it involved going deeper, using more volatile chemicals, creating more unstable conditions underground." Wes touched the pickaxe head gently. Miguel Rodriguez knew about it. He could see what the process was doing to the mine's structural integrity, but Ashford threatened to fire anyone who complained. Grace was studying the old shipping manifest on Jake's laptop with the intensity of someone discovering a piece of her own history. If Samuel Morrison, the engineer, was trying to stop Ashford, then maybe that's why his cousin Samuel Morrison, the miner, was in that mine. Maybe he wasn't just a worker. Maybe he was there to gather evidence. The pieces of the puzzle were beginning to fit together, revealing a conspiracy that stretched from the mines of Wyoming to the laboratories of California. 23 men had died not just from industrial negligence, but from a deliberate cover-up of stolen intellectual property and illegal mining practices. As the afternoon sun slanted through Grace's kitchen windows, they could feel the weight of a century-old injustice pressing down on them. Somewhere in the mountains, the sealed Ashford mine waited with its secrets, and Wes McGraw was becoming the living repository for evidence that could finally expose the truth. Wes woke the next morning to find something impossible on his left ring finger, a worn gold wedding band that hadn't been there when he'd fallen asleep. The ring was simple, unadorned, but clearly old, with the soft patina that comes only from years of wear by working hands. More disturbing was the fact that it seemed to have grown there overnight. The skin around it healed and natural, as if it had always been part of him. He tried to remove it, twisting and pulling gently, but the ring was as much a part of his finger as the bone beneath it. The metal was warm, almost alive, and when he concentrated, he could feel memories that weren't his own stirring in the depths of his mind. A soft knock on his bedroom door interrupted his examination of the ring. "Wes?" Grace's voice was gentle, but concerned. "Are you awake? There's someone here to see you. Just a minute." He pulled on his shirt, wincing slightly as the fabric caught on the pickaxe head still protruding from his shoulder blade. The morning light streaming through his window caught the ring, And for a moment it seemed to glow with the same ethereal quality as Tommy Santos's lamp glass dot downstairs. He found Grace in the kitchen with a woman he didn't recognize, elegant, well-dressed, with the kind of sharp intelligence that came from years of high-stakes legal work. She was perhaps 40, with auburn hair pulled back in a professional style and eyes that seemed to catalog every detail of her surroundings. "Mr. McGraw," the woman said, rising from her chair with the fluid grace of someone accustomed to commanding boardrooms. "I'm Victoria Ashford. I believe we need to talk." The name hit Wes like a physical blow. "Ashford?" "Yes, I'm Cornelius Ashford's great-great-granddaughter. I'm also a corporate attorney specializing in historical liability cases." She gestured toward the chair across from her. "May I suggest you sit down? What I'm about to tell you may be difficult to hear." Wes remained standing, feeling the weight of the wedding ring on his finger and the pickaxe head against his shoulder blade. "I'm listening." "I know about your condition," Victoria said directly. "The artifacts, the visions, the connection to the miners who died in 1883. This isn't the first time something like this has happened to someone connected to the Ashford mine disaster." Grace set down her coffee cup with trembling hands. "What do you mean?" "I mean," Victoria continued, her professional composure cracking slightly, "that my family has been dealing with the consequences of Cornelius Ashford's actions for 5 generations. Every few decades, someone emerges, someone who becomes a conduit for the minor stories. Usually, they die before they can expose the truth." The wedding ring on Wes's finger grew warm, and suddenly he was flooded with memories that belonged to Samuel Morrison, not the engineer from California, but the miner who died in the cave-in. Samuel's wedding day, just 3 months before the disaster. His young bride Elizabeth, radiant in her grandmother's dress, promising to love him through whatever hardships might come. But these weren't just romantic memories. Samuel Morrison had been in the mine for a specific purpose, and now Wes could see it clearly through the ring's connection. Samuel Morrison wasn't just a miner, Wes said, his voice carrying the authority of borrowed memory. He was there too. Gather evidence. His cousin in California had asked him to document what Ashford was really doing in the deeper sections of the mine. Victoria nodded grimly. The Morrison extraction process. It was a revolutionary technique for separating rare earth minerals from common ore, developed by the Morrison family over decades of research. Worth millions in today's money, and Cornelius Ashford stole it. More than stole it. He corrupted it, made it more dangerous and unstable to increase short-term profits. The Morrison technique was designed to be used carefully, with proper safety protocols. Ashford eliminated the safety measures and pushed the process beyond its limits. Grace's face was pale with anger and recognition. That's why the mine collapsed. It wasn't just negligence, it was sabotage. Worse than sabotage, Victoria replied. It was calculated murder. My great-great-grandfather knew the modified process would cause a cave-in. He planned it that way. The weight of that revelation settled over the kitchen like a suffocating blanket. 23 men hadn't died in an industrial accident. They'd been murdered to cover up theft and corruption. "Why are you telling us this?" Wes asked, studying Victoria's face for signs of deception. "Because I'm tired of my family's legacy being built on blood money. Because I've spent years researching this case, and I know that the evidence is still down there in the mine waiting to be found. And because," she hesitated, then continued with visible effort, "because I've been having dreams too." "What kind of dreams?" "I see Cornelius Ashford in his final years, haunted by what he'd done. He hid documents, evidence of the theft, and the planned cave-in. He couldn't destroy them guilt, maybe, or fear that someday someone would need proof of what really happened. They're still there, Mr. McGraw, in a sealed chamber beneath the mine office." Grace stood abruptly and walked to the window, staring out toward the mountains where the mine waited. This changes everything. If there's documentation proving that Cornelius Ashford planned the cave-in, then those men didn't just die. They were murdered for trying to expose a crime. There's more, Victoria said quietly. The Ashford family has been paying subsidies to this town for over a century. Funding for the school, road maintenance, the clinic, all of it designed to keep people quiet about what really happened in the mine. What are you saying? Wes felt the wedding ring pulse with something that might have been Samuel Morrison's indignation. I'm saying that every person in this town has been living on blood money. The prosperity, modest as it is, the reason Dustwell survived when other mining towns became ghost towns, it's all been funded by guilt payments from my family's fortune. The implications hit them like a series of body blows. Dr. Chung's clinic, Grace's boarding house, the scholarships that had sent Jake to college, all of it tainted by the cover-up of a mass murder. The town council knows, Wes realized. That's why they don't want anyone talking about the mine. They're not just protecting Ashford family secrets. They're protecting their own economic survival. Some know more than others, Victoria confirmed. But yes, the leadership has always known that questioning the official story of the mine disaster would risk losing the subsidies that keep this town alive. Grace turned from the window, her face set with determination. Then it's time to stop accepting blood money. It's not that simple, Mrs. Morrison. If the truth comes out, if the Ashford family's liability becomes public, the subsidies will end immediately. This town will face economic collapse. Maybe, Grace said firmly, some things are more important than economic survival. Maybe honoring the memory of 23 murdered men is worth the sacrifice. Wes found himself studying Victoria Ashford more carefully. Despite her professional demeanor, there was something haunted in her eyes, a weight that spoke of years carrying family guilt. Why now? He asked. If your family has been covering this up for 5 generations, why are you willing to expose it now? Victoria was quiet for a long moment, then pulled out her phone and showed them a photograph. A young boy, perhaps 8 years old, with dark hair and serious eyes. My son, she said simply. He's been having nightmares for the past year. Dreams about being trapped underground. Dreams about men who can't breathe. His pediatric psychologist says it's anxiety, but I know better. The guilt is being passed down, generation to generation. I won't let my son inherit this curse. The wedding ring on Wes's finger grew warm, and he felt Samuel Morrison's presence more strongly than ever. Not just memories this time, but something deeper: the miner's love for his wife Elizabeth, his determination to build a life free from the kind of corruption and violence that had ultimately claimed him. Samuel Morrison made a promise to his wife, Wes said, the words coming from somewhere beyond his conscious mind. He promised her that he would expose the truth about what Ashford was doing, no matter the cost. The ring, it's not just about their love. It's about keeping promises, about honoring commitments that transcend death. The evidence is still there, Victoria repeated. In a chamber beneath the mine office, protected by a steel vault that Cornelius Ashford had installed to preserve the documents. But getting to it means going into the mine itself. Grace moved back to the table, her maternal instincts focused on the young man who'd become like a son to her in just a few days. Wes, you don't have to do this. The artifacts, the visions, they're taking a toll on your health. Dr. Chan is worried about you. I know she is. But Grace, I can feel them all, 23 of them. They're not malevolent. They're not trying to hurt anyone. They just want their story told. They want justice. And they want to protect future generations, Victoria added. That's what the dreams have shown me. The mine isn't just a burial ground. It's a warning. The extraction process that killed them could still be dangerous if someone tried to use it again. Before anyone could respond, Martha Henley appeared at the kitchen door, her face flushed from hurrying. I'm sorry to interrupt, but there's been a development. The town council called an emergency meeting for this afternoon. Word is getting out about Wes's condition, and people are starting to ask questions about the mine. What kind of questions? Victoria asked. The kind that haven't been asked in this town for over 100 years, Martha replied grimly. Questions about why we've never properly honored the men who died in the disaster. Questions about why the mine was sealed so quickly after the cave-in. Questions about where our town funding really comes from. Wes felt the weight of Samuel Morrison's wedding ring, Miguel Rodriguez's pickaxe, Jacob Thorne's compass, and Tommy Santos' lamp glass. 4 artifacts, 4 stories, 4 pieces of evidence pointing toward a truth that had been buried for too long. Mrs. Ashford, he said formally, I appreciate your honesty about your family's history, but I need to know, are you here to help us expose the truth, or are you here to find another way to cover it up? Victoria met his gaze directly, and in her eyes he saw the same determination that had driven Samuel Morrison into the dangerous depths of the mine. Mr. McGraw, she said, I'm here to help you finish what those 23 men started, whatever the cost. The Dustwell Community Center hadn't seen this many people in years. Folding chairs borrowed from the Baptist church were arranged in uneven rows, filled with residents who'd lived their entire lives in the shadow of the sealed mine without ever questioning why it remained such a forbidden topic. The afternoon sun streamed through tall windows, illuminating faces lined with the kind of weathered determination that came from generations of surviving in high country. Wes sat in the back row with Grace, Dr. Chun, and Martha, feeling the weight of the artifacts embedded in his body like a chorus of voices demanding to be heard. The fragment of mine cartwheel had emerged during lunch, breaking through the skin on his thigh with less pain than the previous artifacts, but with an intensity that left him dizzy and disoriented. This latest artifact belonged to Heinrich Muller, a German immigrant who'd worked as the mine's equipment maintenance supervisor. Through Heinrich's memories, Wes had seen the deliberate sabotage of safety equipment, cartwheels weakened with acid, support beams cut nearly through, warning systems deliberately disabled. Ladies and gentlemen, Mayor Tom Bradley called the meeting to order, his voice carrying the forced cheerfulness of a man trying to maintain control of an increasingly unstable situation. I know there's been a lot of talk around town about recent events, and I thought it was important for us to come together and discuss things as a community. Tom Bradley was a good man caught in an impossible situation, Wes realized. At 62, he'd served as mayor for 12 years, genuinely caring about the welfare of his constituents while somehow managing to ignore the blood money that kept their town alive. Mr. Mayor, called out Betty Hendricks from the 3rd row, is it true that young McGraw here has been having visions about the old mine disaster? A murmur rippled through the crowd as heads turned to look at Wes. He felt the mining cartwheel fragment pulse against his leg, and with it came Heinrich Muller's sense of righteous anger at the corruption he'd witnessed. Mrs. Hendricks, Tom, replied carefully, I think we need to be cautious about spreading unsubstantiated rumors. Unsubstantiated? Martha Henley rose from her chair with the dignity of her 78 years. Tom Bradley, I've been the keeper of this town's history for 4 decades, and I can tell you that what's happening to Wes McGraw is the most substantiated thing I've ever witnessed. She pulled out a manila folder thick with documents and photographs. For weeks now, I've been cross-referencing Wes's visions with historical records. Every detail he's described, names, faces, equipment, even the layout of the mine tunnels, matches perfectly with documentation from 1883. Martha, please, Tom said, a note of desperation creeping into his voice. We don't need to relitigate events from over a century ago. Don't we? Grace Morrison stood, her voice carrying the moral authority of 5 generations of Dustwell residents. Tom, my family has been in this town since before it was incorporated. We've accepted the subsidies, taken the money, and kept quiet about what we suspected. But I won't do it anymore. Victoria Ashford, who'd been sitting quietly in the front row, rose and turned to address the crowd. My name is Victoria Ashford. I'm the great-great-granddaughter of Cornelius Ashford, the man who owned the mine where 23 men died in 1883. The community center fell silent except for the sound of shifting chairs and uncomfortable breathing. I'm here, Victoria continued, to tell you that the mine disaster wasn't an accident. It was planned murder, designed to cover up the theft of proprietary mining technology and eliminate witnesses who could expose the corruption. The reaction was immediate and explosive. Voices erupted across the room, some angry, some frightened, some demanding more information. Tom Bradley pounded his gavel repeatedly, trying to restore order. That's a serious accusation, Ms. Ashford, called out Jim Murphy, who ran the general store and served on the town council. Do you have proof? I have family documents, shipping records, correspondence between my great-great-grandfather and his business associates. But more importantly, Victoria gestured toward Wes. We have a living witness to what really happened in that mine. All eyes turned to Wes, who felt the collective weight of the artifacts urging him to speak. He stood slowly, feeling Heinrich Muller's righteous anger mixing with Miguel Rodriguez's leadership, Samuel Morrison's love for justice, Jacob Dorn's desire to expose the truth, and Tommy Santos's youthful determination to help his fellow workers. I know this is hard to believe, Wes began, his voice carrying more confidence than he felt. 3 weeks ago, I was just a drifter with a sore foot. But something happened when Dr. Chun removed that first artifact from my body. I started seeing through the eyes of the men who died in the mine. He pulled the cracked lamp glass from his pocket, watching as its ethereal light cast dancing shadows on the community center walls. This belonged to Tommy Santos, a 19-year-old kid from New Mexico who died trying to help his fellow miners escape. Through this lamp glass, I've seen evidence of deliberate sabotage, of equipment that was intentionally weakened, of warning systems that were disabled on purpose. Even if that's true, said Council Member Robert Hayes, what does it matter now? Those men are dead. Ashford is dead, and we have a town to keep running. The mining cartwheel fragment pulsed against Wes's leg, and Heinrich Muller's memories flooded through him with unprecedented clarity. He could see the German immigrant's final moments, trapped beneath a cart that had been deliberately sabotaged, knowing that his death would prevent him from testifying about the safety violations he documented. It matters, Wes said, his voice now carrying Heinrich's slight accent, because Heinrich Muller spent weeks documenting every piece of sabotaged equipment, every safety violation, every corner that was cut to maximize profits. His evidence is still down there in the mine office, waiting to prove that 23 good men were murdered for corporate greed. Dr. Chun stood, adding her medical authority to the discussion. I've been documenting Wes's condition from a scientific perspective. What he's experiencing is medically impossible, but it's happening nonetheless. The artifacts emerging from his body are genuine historical objects, and the information they're providing is verifiable through independent historical research. Dr. Chun, Tom Bradley said desperately, surely you're not suggesting we take hallucinations and delusions as historical fact. I'm suggesting that we have an obligation to investigate credible evidence, regardless of how that evidence was obtained. Jake Bradley, who'd been sitting quietly beside his father, stood with obvious conflict written across his face. Dad, I've been researching the mine disaster for weeks now. The shipping records, the geological surveys, the territorial reports, none of it adds up to an accidental cave-in. There are too many inconsistencies, too many gaps in the official story. Tom looked at his son with the pain of a man watching his family divide over principles. Jake, you don't understand the bigger picture. This town survives because of agreements that were made generations ago. If we start questioning those agreements, Then maybe it's time for those agreements to end, Grace interrupted. Tom, how many of us here have taken jobs funded by Ashford money? How many of our children have received scholarships from the Ashford Foundation? How many times have we accepted funding for projects we couldn't afford on our own? The uncomfortable silence that followed her questions was answer enough. I won't speak for anyone else, Grace continued, but I can't continue accepting money that's tainted with the blood of innocent men. It's time to honor their memory properly, even if it means economic hardship for our community. Easy words from someone who owns property outright, muttered Robert Hayes. Some of us have mortgages, business loans, families to support. And some of us, Victoria Ashford said quietly, have consciences that won't let us sleep at night. The meeting continued for another hour, with the community splitting along predictable lines, older residents generally supporting the investigation. Younger families worried about economic consequences, business owners calculating the potential impact on their livelihoods. As the crowd began to disperse, Tom Bradley approached Wes with the weary expression of a man carrying too much responsibility. Son, he said quietly, I want you to know that I don't doubt your sincerity. But this town has survived for over a century by not asking certain questions. If you're determined to seek those answers, I can't stop you. But I also can't guarantee that everyone will support what you might find. Wes felt the artifacts pulse in unison, the compass pointing toward truth, the spurs urging movement, the lamp glass promising illumination, the pickaxe ready to break through barriers, the wedding ring binding him to promises that transcended death, and the cartwheel fragment representing the working men whose lives had been sacrificed for profit. Mr. Bradley, he said respectfully, I understand your position, but some truths are bigger than the convenience of those who benefit from keeping them buried. Those 23 men deserve to have their story told, regardless of the cost. As the community center emptied, Wes found himself surrounded by the small group of people who committed to helping him uncover the truth. Grace with her moral courage, Dr. Chun with her scientific integrity, Martha with her historical knowledge, Jake with his research skills, and Victoria with her family guilt and determination to make amends. The mining cart wheel fragment throbbed against his leg, carrying with it Heinrich Muller's final message. The evidence was in the mine, waiting for someone brave enough to retrieve it. The revelation came to Wes during the deepest part of the night, when the mountain winds howled around Grace's boarding house and the artifacts in his body pulsed with synchronized urgency. This vision was different from the others, more complete, more devastating, and absolutely undeniable in its clarity. He found himself standing in the ornate office of Cornelius Ashford, but not as one of the doomed miners. This time, he was experiencing the memories of the mine owner himself, seeing through the eyes of the man who'd orchestrated one of the most calculated murders in American mining history. The office was richly appointed with mahogany furniture, Persian rugs, and floor-to-ceiling bookshelves filled with leather-bound volumes on geology, engineering, and law. A massive safe stood in the corner, its brass fittings gleaming in the light from the oil lamps. And in Ashford's hands was a key, an ornate master key that opened every lock in the mine complex. Mr. Ashford, his foreman was saying, the men are getting suspicious about the deeper workings. Rodriguez has been asking questions about the Morrison extraction process, and some of the miners have seen the specialized equipment we've been using. Cornelius Ashford was a man in his 50s, well-dressed and soft around the middle from years of comfortable living built on other men's labor. His eyes held the cold calculation of someone who viewed human life as just another business expense. How? Many of them know the details? Ashford asked. Rodriguez, certainly. The Morrison boy Samuel, he's been documenting everything, probably on his cousin's orders. Thorne has figured out that we're not following standard extraction protocols. And the German Muller, he's been keeping detailed records of all the equipment modifications. Anyone else? Santos has been helping Rodriguez with measurements and documentation. The older miners suspect something, but they don't have specifics. Ashford walked to the window, looking out over the mining camp where 23 men worked and lived, unaware that their employer was planning their deaths. The Morrison extraction process has already made us more money in 6 months than the legitimate mining operation would generate in 5 years. But if word gets out that we've stolen the technique, if the territorial authorities investigate the safety violations, we'll lose everything, the foreman finished. Worse than that, we'll face criminal charges for theft and reckless endangerment. The Morrison family has political connections in California. They could destroy us in court. The vision shifted, and Wes saw Ashford making the final preparations for mass murder. The key in his hands wasn't just a master key, it was the only key that could unlock the emergency exits from the deepest sections of the mine. Without it, anyone working in the lower tunnels would be trapped when the supports collapsed. "Sir," the foreman asked, "are you certain about this course of action?" 23 men. 23 witnesses, Ashford corrected coldly. 23. Men who could testify about our use of the Morrison process, about the safety violations, about the illegal extraction from sections we don't have proper rights to mine. Dead men can't testify. Wes watched in horror as Ashford outlined his plan. The supports in the deepest section would be weakened with acid. The warning bells that should alert miners to dangerous gas levels would be disabled. The emergency exits would be locked, and the master key would be thrown into the shaft, where it would be found with the bodies, making it appear that the foreman had died trying to help his men escape. "What about the documentation they've been keeping?" the foreman asked. "Rodriguez's records will be destroyed in the collapse. The Germans' equipment logs are kept in the mine office. They'll be buried under tons of rock. Samuel Morrison's evidence for his cousin will never see the light of day." The vision grew more intense, and Wes could feel Ashford's guilt warring with his greed. The mine owner knew he was planning murder, but the potential profits from the stolen Morrison process had corrupted him beyond redemption. "There's one more thing," Ashford said, walking to his safe and withdrawing a metal box. "The evidence of our theft, the original Morrison family documents we used to replicate their process, the correspondence with our buyers in San Francisco, the geological surveys that prove we've been mining outside our legal boundaries, all of it needs to be preserved." "Preserved? Shouldn't we destroy it?" "No. Someday, when the heat dies down, when the territorial authorities stop investigating mining accidents so thoroughly, this evidence might be valuable again. The Morrison process could make us millions if we can use it legitimately in other locations." Wes watched Ashford place the metal box in a specially constructed vault beneath the mine office, a steel chamber designed to survive cave-ins and protect its contents for decades. The master key went into the box along with the documents, ensuring that the evidence of both the theft and the planned murders would be preserved together. "How will we access it later?" the foreman asked. "The vault has a time-release mechanism. Can't be opened for 50 years after it's sealed. By then, everyone involved will be dead. The statute of limitations will have expired, and our heirs can recover the evidence without legal consequences." The vision reached its climax as Wes experienced Ashford's final moments in the mine. The collapse had been more extensive than planned, trapping the mine owner in his own death trap. As water flooded the lower tunnels and the air ran out, Cornelius Ashford had died knowing that his crimes would be buried with him. But he'd been wrong. The vault's time-release mechanism had been damaged in the collapse, and the steel chamber had remained sealed not for 50 years, but for over a century. The evidence was still there, waiting for someone with the master key to finally expose the truth. Wes gasped awake, his hand reflexively closing around something cold and metal that had materialized in his palm during the vision. The master key ornate, heavy, inscribed with the Ashford Mining Company logo laying his hand like a weight of destiny. "Grace!" he called out, his voice hoarse with emotion and revelation. She appeared in his doorway within moments, wrapped in her quilted robe and carrying an oil lamp. "Wes, what is it?" "I know everything," he said, holding up the master key. "The whole truth, not just about the murders, but about where the evidence is hidden. Ashford preserved it all in a vault beneath the mine office. This key will open it." Grace sat on the edge of his bed, studying the ornate key in the lamplight. "You experienced Ashford's memories?" "Every detail. The planning, the preparation, the cold calculation of 23 murders. And the location of the evidence that will prove everything, the theft of the Morrison process, the deliberate sabotage, the premeditated murder of innocent men." "Wes," Grace said gently, "you realize what this means? If you're right, if the evidence is really there, it will destroy the official story completely. There won't be any way to claim those men died in an industrial accident. I know. And I also know that some people in this town will do anything to prevent that evidence from being revealed." As if summoned by his words, they heard the sound of vehicles approaching the boarding house, multiple engines, moving slowly and deliberately through the pre-dawn darkness. Grace moved to the window and peered through the curtains. "There are 3 trucks parked outside. Men getting out. I recognize some of them. Town council members, some of the business owners from yesterday's meeting." Wes felt the master key pulse in his hand, and with it came the collective urgency of 23 murdered miners whose stories had waited over a century to be told. "They're here to stop us," he realized. "Someone figured out that the truth is about to come out, and they can't let that happen. What do we do?" Before Wes could answer, they heard footsteps on the front porch and a firm knock on the door. "Mrs. Morrison," came Tom Bradley's voice, strained with the weight of an impossible situation. "We need to talk to Mr. McGraw. It's important." Grace looked at Wes with eyes that held 5 generations of Dustwell family history and the moral courage that had sustained her through decades of hardship. "The back stairs," she whispered. "My truck is parked behind the house. If you can get to Dr. Chen's clinic, maybe." "No," Wes said firmly, feeling the authority of 23 men who'd refused to be silenced by threats and violence. "I'm done running. It's time to face this head on." He stood, the master key clutched in his hand and the weight of historical truth on his shoulders. Outside, the delegation of concerned citizens waited, probably believing they were protecting their community's economic survival. But Wes McGraw, carrying the artifacts and memories of 23 murdered miners, was no longer just a drifter, seeking treatment for a swollen foot. He was the living voice of men who'd been silenced too long, and he was finally ready to speak their truth. The confrontation in Grace's living room had the tense, inevitable quality of a storm that had been building for over a century. Tom Bradley sat uncomfortably in the wingback chair that had belonged to Grace's grandmother, his weathered hands clasped tightly in his lap as he struggled to find words for an impossible situation. Beside him, council members Robert Hayes and Jim Murphy looked like men who'd been asked to negotiate with ghosts. Wes stood near the fireplace, the master key to the mine office clearly visible in his right hand, while the other artifacts pulsed beneath his skin with increasing urgency. Dr. Chen had arrived 20 minutes earlier, summoned by Grace's hurried phone call, and now sat on the sofa with her medical bag open, monitoring Wes's vital signs as his body continued its supernatural transformation. "Son," Tom Bradley began, his voice carrying the weight of 12 years as mayor and 62 years of life in a town built on buried secrets. "We're not here to threaten you or try to stop you from seeking the truth. But we need you to understand the consequences of what you're proposing to do." "I understand them perfectly, Mr. Bradley," Wes replied, feeling Miguel Rodriguez's leadership flowing through him. 23 men were murdered to protect corporate profits and cover up theft. Their families never knew the truth. The evidence has been waiting in that mine for over a century, and it's time to bring it to light. Robert Hayes leaned forward, his face etched with the kind of practical concern that comes from running a small business in an economically marginal community. Wes, I've lived in this town my entire life. My grandfather worked in other mines in this region, and I know how dangerous that work was. Maybe what happened at the Ashford mine was worse than an accident, but destroying our community's economic foundation won't bring those men back. No, Grace interjected from her position near the kitchen doorway, but it might finally let them rest in peace. Martha Henley, who'd been quietly organizing historical documents on the coffee table, looked up with the sharp intelligence that had made her the unofficial keeper of Dustwell's memory for 4 decades. Tom, in all the years you've been mayor, have you ever wondered why the Ashford Foundation subsidies come with such strict conditions? Why we're not allowed to discuss the mine disaster in any official town publications? Why the Foundation's lawyers review our school curriculum to ensure the 1883 cave-in is only mentioned as an industrial accident? Tom's shoulders sagged with the weight of knowledge he'd tried to ignore for years. Of course, I've wondered. But Martha, questioning those arrangements would mean losing funding that keeps this town alive. The school, the clinic, the road maintenance, we'd lose it all. And maybe, Dr. Chun said quietly, it's time to find a different way to survive. One that doesn't require us to be complicit in covering up mass murder. Victoria Ashford, who'd been standing silently by the window, watching the sunrise paint the mountains gold and crimson, turned to face the room. There's something else you need to know about the Foundation's subsidies. They're not just hush money, they're insurance payments. What do you mean? Jim Murphy asked. I mean that my family has been paying this town not just to keep quiet about the mine disaster, but to ensure that if anyone ever did start asking questions, the community would have a financial incentive to discourage further investigation. Victoria's voice carried the bitter taste of generational guilt. Every subsidy check, every scholarship, every infrastructure improvement, it's all been designed to make the truth too expensive for this town to afford. The master key in Wes's hand grew warm, and suddenly he was experiencing another fragment of memory, not from one of the murdered miners this time, but from Cornelius Ashford's final moments in the collapsed mine. The dying mine owner had felt something that might have been remorse, a flicker of conscience that led him to preserve the evidence rather than destroy it completely. He knew, Wes said, his voice carrying echoes of Ashford's dying thoughts. In his final moments, Cornelius Ashford knew that someday the truth would have to come out. That's why he designed the vault with a time-release mechanism, not to hide the evidence forever, but to delay its revelation until the immediate legal consequences had expired. What are you saying? Tom asked. I'm saying that even Ashford believed those 23 men deserved justice, eventually. The vault wasn't just about protecting his heirs from prosecution. It was about preserving evidence for posterity, for a time when the truth could be revealed without destroying innocent people who had no part in the original crimes. As if summoned by the weight of the moment, Jake Bradley appeared in the doorway, his laptop bag slung over his shoulder and his face flushed with the excitement of discovery. Dad, I've been up all night researching the Ashford Foundation's financial structure, he announced, then paused as he took in the tense scene in the living room. I'm sorry, I didn't know you were in a meeting. Come in, Jake, Grace said gently. This involves all of us now. Jake entered and immediately pulled out his laptop, his historian's instincts taking over despite the emotional complexity of the situation. What I found changes everything. The Ashford Foundation isn't just paying subsidies to Dustwell. They've been making similar payments to 17 other communities across the western states, towns where Ashford mining operations resulted in worker deaths or environmental damage. How much are we talking about? Victoria asked, though her expression suggested she already suspected the answer. Collectively, over the past century, The foundation has paid out more than $40 million in what they call community development grants. But what are really liability settlements? Jake turned his laptop screen toward the room, showing a spreadsheet with decades of financial data. Dad, our town has received $2.3 million since 1923. But here's the thing. The foundation's charter includes a clause that terminates all payments if any recipient community publicly acknowledges that Ashford mining operations resulted in wrongful deaths. The silence that followed was broken only by the ticking of Grace's mantle clock and the distant sound of morning traffic on the county road. So they've bought our silence, Robert Hayes said flatly. For over 100 years, they've been paying. Used to forget that 23 men were murdered. It's more complex than that, Victoria said. My family genuinely believed they were helping these communities recover from tragic accidents. It's only in recent years, as I've researched the legal and financial records, that I've realized the payments were structured as liability protection rather than charitable giving. Dr. Chun, who'd been monitoring Wes's condition throughout the conversation, looked up from her medical notes with concern. His vital signs are becoming increasingly unstable. Heart rate is elevated, blood pressure is spiking, and I'm detecting unusual neural activity. Whatever process is happening in his body, it's accelerating. As if responding to her words, Wes felt a new presence stirring in his consciousness. Not another individual miner this time, but something collective, unified, urgent. It was the voice of all 23 men speaking together, their separate identities merged into a single plea for justice. They're running out of time, he said, his voice carrying harmonics that didn't quite sound like his own. The artifacts, the visions, they're not just random memories. They're evidence, testimony, witness statements that have been preserved. In the only way possible until someone could finally hear them. He pulled the cracked lamp glass from his pocket, watching as its ethereal light joined with the glow from Samuel Morrison's wedding ring, the compass pointing toward the mine, the spurs that urged action, the pickaxe that promised to break through barriers, and the cartwheel fragment that represented the working men whose lives had been sacrificed. Each artifact contained specific evidence about the murders. Wes continued, his consciousness flowing between his own identity and the collective memory of the dead miners. The pocket watch stopped at the exact moment the supports were sabotaged. The compass points to the location where the stolen Morrison extraction process was being used illegally. The spurs show the paths the miners took trying to escape the deliberately blocked exits. The lamp glass illuminates the tool marks that prove the cave-in was caused by acid-weakened supports. The pickaxe carries traces of the acid that was used to sabotage the mine's structural integrity. The cartwheel fragment shows the deliberate damage to emergency equipment. Martha Henley was furiously taking notes, a librarian's instincts recognizing the historical significance of what she was witnessing. Wes, if what you're experiencing is accurate, then you're not just having visions. You're receiving testimony from beyond the grave. There's more, Wes said, feeling the final artifact beginning to stir near his throat. One more piece of evidence. The foreman's whistle, the signal that should have warned the miners to evacuate but was deliberately silenced. Before anyone could respond, the whistle emerged through the skin at the base of his throat. A small, silver instrument blackened with age and carrying the weight of 23 men's final breaths. As it broke free, Wes felt his connection to the dead miners reach its peak intensity. They're not asking for vengeance, he said, his voice now clearly carrying the collective wisdom of men who'd had more than a century to reflect on their deaths. They're asking for their story to be told honestly. They want their families, their descendants who never knew the truth, to understand that they died fighting corruption, not just digging for ore. Victoria moved to the center of the room, her decision crystallizing as she watched this impossible testimony unfold. Then we're going to the mine. Today. we're gonna open that vault and retrieve the evidence that Cornelius Ashford preserved." "Victoria," Tom Bradley protested, "the mine has been sealed for over a century. The structural integrity, My office was built separately from the main tunnels," Jake interrupted, his historical research suddenly becoming critically relevant. "According to the original architectural plans, the office structure should still be accessible even if the mining tunnels collapsed." Dr. Chun closed her medical bag with a decisive snap. "If we're doing this, I'm going with you. Wes's condition is beyond anything I can treat in a conventional setting, but I can at least monitor his vital signs and provide emergency care if needed." Grace walked to an old cabinet and withdrew a heavy jacket that had belonged to her late husband. "Then, we all go together. Those men died alone, abandoned by people who should have protected them. We're not going to abandon them again." As the morning sun climbed higher over the mountains, casting long shadows across the prairie grassland that surrounded Dustwell, the small group of unlikely allies prepared for a journey that would either expose a century-old injustice or destroy the economic foundation of the only community most of them had ever known. Wes felt the 7 artifacts pulsing in unison, their combined weight pulling him northwest toward the sealed mine where the truth waited in a steel vault designed to preserve evidence for exactly this moment. The foreman's whistle at his throat carried the breath of 23 murdered men, and their collective voice spoke through him with growing urgency. "Find us. Remember us. Tell our story." The time for half-truths and comfortable lies had ended. The reckoning that Cornelius Ashford had tried to delay for 50 years had finally arrived, and nothing would ever be the same for the people of Dustwell, Wyoming. The old mining road wound through stands of aspen and pine, climbing steadily toward the foothills where the Ashford mine had been sealed for over a century. Grace's pickup truck led the small convoy, followed by Dr. Chun's SUV and Victoria's rental car, their vehicles kicking up dust clouds that hung in the thin mountain air like ghosts reluctant to settle. Wes rode in the passenger seat beside Grace, the 7 artifacts pulsing with synchronized energy that seemed to grow stronger. With each mile they traveled northwest. The master key lay warm in his palm, and through it he could feel the pull of the sealed vault waiting beneath tons of collapsed rock and concrete. "The entrance should be just around this next bend," Martha said from the back seat, consulting a hand-drawn map that had been preserved in the town's historical archives. According to the Territorial Survey from 1884, the mine office was built into the hillside about 50 yards from the main tunnel entrance. They rounded a curve flanked by towering ponderosa pines, and suddenly the scarred landscape of the old mining operation spread before them. What had once been a bustling industrial site was now a testament to nature's ability to reclaim. Disturbed land wildflowers grew where ore carts had once rolled, and young trees sprouted from the ruins of equipment sheds. But the mine office remained, its stone foundation and reinforced walls having withstood more than a century of mountain weather. The structure was partially buried under debris from the collapsed main tunnels, but the heavy wooden door was still visible, sealed with a concrete barrier that bore the territorial government's official closure notice, dated October 30th, 1883. "There," Victoria said, stepping out of her car and pointing toward the office entrance. "That's where the vault is located. Beneath the floor, in a chamber my great-great-grandfather had specially constructed." Dr. Chen immediately began setting up a portable medical monitoring station, her scientific training demanding that she document every aspect of Wes's condition during what might be the most significant supernatural event in recorded history. Heart rate 110, blood pressure elevated but stable. The artifacts are showing increased electromagnetic activity on my instruments. Jake had brought surveying equipment borrowed from the county road department, and he began taking measurements to determine the safest way to breach the concrete barrier. The seal is thick, but it's old concrete brittle from decades of freeze-thaw cycles. We should be able to break through with the right tools. As they prepared for the excavation, Wes felt his connection to the 23 miners intensify beyond anything he'd experienced before. Their voices merged into a chorus of guidance, warning him about structural weaknesses in the office building and directing him toward the exact location of the hidden vault. Miguel Rodriguez says the floor planks are loose near the back corner. Wes reported, his voice carrying the foreman's authority, even as his own personality remained distinct. The vault entrance is hidden under what looks like a storage closet. Grace had brought pickaxes and shovels from her late husband's tool collection, and she handed them out with the matter-of-fact efficiency of a woman who'd spent her life dealing with practical challenges. Then we clear the debris, break through that concrete seal, and find the truth that's been waiting for us. The work was slow and physically demanding, made more difficult by the altitude and the weight of history pressing down on them. But as they broke through the concrete barrier and cleared away decades of accumulated debris, Wes felt the artifacts responding with increasing intensity. The pocket watch gear pulsed with recognition as they uncovered the mine office's accounting. Ledgers still preserved in a metal filing cabinet. The compass spun wildly as they approached the location where the Morrison extraction process had been illegally implemented. The lamp glass glowed brighter as daylight penetrated spaces that had been sealed in darkness for over a century. "Here," Wes said, feeling Miguel Rodriguez's memories, guiding him to a section of floorboard that looked identical to the rest, but concealed the entrance to Cornelius Ashford's secret vault. "The mechanism should be under this board." Jake used a crowbar to pry up the wooden planks, revealing a complex mechanical lock system built into the stone foundation. The lock was a masterpiece of 19th century engineering, a combination of key-operated mechanisms and weight-balanced triggers designed to keep the vault sealed until the proper conditions were met. "The master key goes here," Wes said, inserting the ornate key into the primary lock. "But there's more. The other artifacts act as additional keys to different parts of the mechanism." He placed Samuel Morrison's wedding ring against a circular depression in the lock assembly, feeling the mechanism respond with a deep, resonant click. The silver spurs aligned with grooves designed to accept their unique shape, while the cracked lamp glass fit perfectly into a crystal housing that seemed designed to focus light through the transparent portions. "It's opening," Victoria whispered, watching as the centuries-old mechanism slowly came to life. The pickaxe head served as a lever to release the final locking mechanism, while the cartwheel fragment aligned with a gear system that controlled the vault's heavy steel door dot as the foreman's whistle touched the last component. A sound chamber designed to detect the specific pitch of a mine supervisor's warning signal. The entire mechanism engaged with a series of clicks, whirs, and deep metallic groans. The steel door swung open on well-oiled hinges, revealing a chamber that had been sealed since Cornelius Ashford's final day on Earth. Inside, illuminated by the ethereal glow of Tommy Santos's lamp glass, was a metal document box that contained evidence of the most calculated mass murder in American mining history. The truth, preserved in Ashford's own handwriting, waited to finally be revealed. The metal document box was heavier than Victoria had expected, requiring both her and Jake to lift it from the vault and carry it into the afternoon sunlight. As they set it on a flat boulder that had once been part of the mine's foundation, Wes felt the artifacts in his body begin to pulse with a rhythm that seemed almost like breathing, as if the dead miners were holding their breath in anticipation of their story finally being told. "The lock mechanism is similar to the vault," Dr. Chun observed, examining the intricate brass fittings on the document box. "It appears to require multiple components to open." Wes approached the box, feeling the master key in his hand grow warm, as it responded to proximity to its intended purpose. But as he inserted the key into the primary lock, something unexpected happened. the artifacts in his body began to fade, their weight and substance diminishing as their energy was drawn into the opening mechanism. "They're dissolving," Grace whispered in wonder, watching as the pickaxe head protruding from Wes's shoulder became translucent, then gradually disappeared entirely. "The artifacts are returning to where they belong." One by one, the items that had emerged from Wes's body over the past weeks began to fade away. The pocket watch gear, the silver spurs, the cracked lamp glass, the wedding ring, the cartwheel fragment, all of them were being absorbed into the box's opening mechanism, their purpose finally fulfilled. But as the artifacts dissolved, they left behind something more valuable than metal and glass. They left behind the complete memories and testimony of 23 murdered men. Wes found himself in possession of every detail of their lives, their work, their fears, and their final moments, all organized and coherent as if he'd spent years interviewing each man personally. The foreman's whistle was the last to fade. But as it did, it released a sound not audible to human ears, but felt in the bones and spirit of everyone present. It was the sound of 23 men finally being heard, their voices united in testimony that transcended death itself. The document box opened with a decisive click, its lid rising to reveal papers that had been preserved in perfect condition for over a century. The first document that Victoria lifted from the box was written in Cornelius Ashford's own handwriting, dated September 15th, 1883, exactly 1 month before the planned cave-in. "Final preparation for elimination of witnesses," she read aloud, her voice shaking with the weight of her ancestors' calculated evil. "Rodriguez, Morrison, and Thorne have gathered sufficient evidence to expose our use of the Morrison extraction process. Federal investigators would certainly pursue criminal charges for patent theft and illegal mining operations." Martha Henley was frantically taking notes, her historian's training helping her maintain professional composure despite the devastating nature of the evidence. "This is a confession to premeditated murder," she said, written in the perpetrator's own hand. Jake had begun photographing each document with his phone, ensuring that the evidence would be preserved even if something happened to the originals. "Look at this," he said, pointing to a detailed diagram. "It's a schematic of the mine support structure with notations showing exactly which beams would be weakened and in what sequence to ensure maximum casualties." Dr. Chun, still monitoring Wes's vital signs, looked up from her instruments with relief. "His condition is stabilizing rapidly. Heart rate returning to normal, blood pressure dropping to healthy levels, neural activity normalizing." Whatever process was happening in his body, the completion of the evidence transfer seems to have resolved it. Wes felt lighter than he had in weeks, but not empty and enriched, rather than depleted by his service as a vessel for the miner's testimony. The supernatural weight was gone, but the knowledge remained, integrated into his own consciousness in a way that felt natural and permanent. "There's more," Victoria continued, lifting additional documents from the box. Correspondence with buyers in San Francisco, shipping manifests for the stolen rare earth minerals, even receipts for the acid used to weaken the mine supports. And here, she held up a thick envelope sealed with wax. A letter addressed to whoever finds this evidence. Grace broke the wax seal with reverent care, unfolding a letter written in Cornelius Ashford's increasingly desperate handwriting. "If you are reading this," Grace read, "then I am dead, and the truth about what happened in the Ashford mine has finally been discovered. I confess that I deliberately caused the deaths of 23 innocent men to conceal my theft of proprietary mining techniques from the Morrison family of California. I preserved this evidence not out of nobility, but out of cowardice. I could not destroy the proof of my crimes, but I lacked the courage to confess them while alive." The letter continued for several pages, detailing every aspect of the conspiracy and providing legal testimony that would have been sufficient to convict Ashford of first-degree murder if he had lived to face trial. He names accomplices, Jake noted, photographing the letter page by page. Government officials who were bribed, territorial inspectors who falsified reports, even the identities of the buyers in San Francisco, who knew they were purchasing stolen intellectual property. As the afternoon sun began to sink toward the western mountains, the small group sat surrounded by more than a century of preserved evidence, feeling the weight of justice finally being served. The supernatural elements of their experience were fading, leaving behind something more valuable, the truth, documented and undeniable, ready to honor the memory of 23 men whose voices had been silenced too long. Wes felt the presence of the miners one last time, not as individual consciousnesses, but as a collective sense of peace and gratitude. Their story could finally be told. Their family's descendants could finally know the truth. Justice, delayed but not denied, was finally within reach. 6 months had passed since the day Wes McGraw and his unlikely band of truth-seekers had opened Cornelius Ashford's vault and exposed one of the most calculated murders in American mining history. Now, standing in the warm May sunshine beside the newly erected memorial at the former mine site, Wes could hardly believe how much had changed, not just in his own life, but in the entire community of Dustwell, Wyoming. The memorial was simple but dignified. 23 bronze plaques, set in a circle around a central stone monument, each bearing the name and story of a miner who had died trying to expose corporate corruption. The text on each plaque had been crafted from the testimony Wes carried in his memory, ensuring that Miguel Rodriguez's leadership, Samuel Morrison's love for his wife, Jacob Thorne's dedication to safety, Tommy Santos's youthful courage, Heinrich Muller's meticulous record-keeping, and all the others were remembered not just as victims, but as heroes who had died fighting for justice. The dedication ceremony went well, Grace said, joining Wes beside Samuel Morrison's plaque. At 56, she looked younger than she had 6 months ago, as if the weight of carrying her family's buried secrets had aged her prematurely. I think Elizabeth would be proud to know that her husband's sacrifice finally means something. Wes nodded, touching the simple pocket watch he now carried, not a supernatural artifact, but a gift from the people of Dustwell to replace the connection he'd lost when the miners' belongings had returned to their eternal rest. The whole town turned out, even some of the people who opposed us initially. The revelation of Ashford's confession had sent shockwaves far beyond the boundaries of Dustwell. Victoria Ashford had made good on her promise to expose her family's crimes, publishing the complete documentation in a book that had become a bestseller and donating the proceeds to a foundation dedicated to supporting the families of workers killed by corporate negligence. The legal ramifications had been complex. Too much time had passed for criminal charges, but 17 communities across the western states had filed civil lawsuits, seeking compensation for a century of hush money that had kept them complicit in covering up industrial murders. Dr. Chun tells me your recovery is complete, Grace continued. No more symptoms, no more supernatural experiences. Nothing like that, Wes confirmed. But I still carry their memories, their stories. Not as visions or hallucinations, but as knowledge, as if I'd spent years interviewing each of them personally. It's become part of who I am. Dr. Sarah Chun approached from the memorial's visitor center, where she'd been giving a presentation to a group of mining safety investigators from the federal government. The revelation that the Ashford disaster had been deliberately planned had prompted a comprehensive review of historical mining accidents, and Dr. Chun's documentation of Wes's supernatural experience had become an unexpected cornerstone of medical literature dealing with unexplained phenomena. The investigators were impressed with the memorial, she reported, and they've confirmed that the evidence you helped recover has led to policy changes in how industrial accidents are investigated. They're looking for similar patterns of cover-up in other historical cases. The economic impact on Dustwell had been significant but not catastrophic. The end of Ashford Foundation subsidies had forced the community to find new sources of revenue, leading to the development of the memorial site as a historical tourism destination. The story of the 23 murdered miners had captured national attention, drawing visitors from across the country who wanted to understand how corporate greed had claimed so many innocent lives. Jake Bradley had left his job at the hardware store to become the memorial's full-time director, using his historical research skills to develop educational programs that ensured the miners' story would be preserved for future generations. His work had also led to the discovery of similar cover-ups in other Ashford mining operations, expanding the scope of justice to victims in multiple states. "There's someone here to see you," Martha Henley announced, emerging from the visitor center with a young woman in her 20s. The visitor had dark hair and serious eyes, and something about her bearing reminded Wes of the photographs he'd seen of the original miners' families. "Mr. McGraw," the young woman said, extending her hand. "I'm Elena Santos Rodriguez. My great-great-grandfather was Tommy Santos." Wes felt a warm recognition, not supernatural but deeply human, the satisfaction of seeing a story come full circle. Tommy was a brave young man. He died trying to help his fellow workers escape. "I know. I've read his story on the memorial plaque, and I wanted to thank you for making sure his sacrifice was remembered." Elena's eyes filled with tears. "My family never knew how he died. We were told it was just an industrial accident, that there was nothing heroic or meaningful about it. Learning the truth, learning that he died fighting corruption, it changes everything." Similar reunions had been happening for months as descendants of the murdered miners traveled to Dustwell to learn the truth about their ancestors. The memorial had become not just a historical site, but a place of healing for families who carried questions for generations. Victoria Ashford appeared at the edge of the memorial circle, accompanied by a young boy with dark hair and serious eyes, her son, who no longer suffered from nightmares about being trapped underground. The family guilt that had haunted the Ashford lineage for 5 generations had finally been lifted through the simple act of acknowledging the truth. The Foundation's legal settlement with the affected communities was finalized yesterday, Victoria announced. "Every family will receive compensation, and we've established educational funds to ensure that the story of corporate accountability continues to be told." As the afternoon sun began to set behind the mountains, casting long shadows across the memorial circle, Wes found himself thinking about the journey that had brought him to this moment. 6 months ago, he'd been a drifter with a sore foot, seeking nothing more than medical treatment in a small town where he'd never intended to stay. Now, he was part of something larger, a community that had chosen truth over comfort, justice over economic security, and healing over willful ignorance. He'd found a home not just in Dustwell, but in the knowledge that he'd served as a voice for men who'd been silenced too long. Grace slipped her arm through his as they walked back toward town, where the boarding house waited with the comfortable warmth of home. "What's next for you, Wes McGraw?" He pulled out his pocket watch, his own now, not a supernatural artifact, and checked the time. "Tomorrow morning, I'm meeting with a young man who's been having strange dreams about a mining accident in Colorado. Seems like there might be other stories that need telling." The cycle of truth-telling would continue, not through supernatural intervention, but through the very human desire to honor the dead and protect the living. Some injustices, Wes had learned, echo through time until someone finally hears them and finds the courage to speak their truth, in the warm evening air. As the lights of Dustwell twinkled to life in the valley below, the voices of 23 murdered miners finally rested in the peace that comes from being remembered, honored, and believed.